degrees 2 days ago and now it's snowing. I am cold. Cheers to springtime in the Midwest. There's nothing in here. I don't know why I'm lying to you guys. So, I don't know about you all, but whenever the weather gets cold, I have this innate need to marathon all of the Harry Potter movies for some reason. So I got to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and while I was admiring the outfits that the costuming department so kindly put together for all of the characters, there was one character whose outfit really stood out to me. Dobby. So I was looking at Dobby's outfit throughout the movies, and I thought to myself, you know, despite the fact that it's described as a dirty pillowcase, that would make the perfect base for a dress. With the quick bit of research done on Google, I learned that Dobby the House Elf is only 3 feet and 6 inches tall. To my knowledge, I am taller than that, which led me to the conclusion that I couldn't just make this dress out of one pillowcase like what Dobby wears in the movie because I don't want to get arrested for public indecency. Instead, I'm making it out of 4. Alright, so we're in a secondary location. And by secondary location, I mean the secondary location within my primary location, which is still the guest room. I'm just on the floor now. So like I said earlier, I got these 4 pillowcases off of Amazon. They are king size, and just like me, they were most likely made in China. Actually, made in Pakistan. Okay, I was wrong. They're not like me at all, because according to my 23andMe results, I was definitely not made in Pakistan. Anyway, I'll be turning that first pillowcase into the bodice by cutting out a rectangle of fabric that's roughly 6 inches wider than my torso and about 14 inches long. Because it's a pillowcase, the fabric is already doubled up for me. Unfortunately, because it's a pillowcase, I did have to cut off a good chunk of fabric from the ends where the cuff is, and then I also had to go in with a seam ripper for each of the pieces, and that was a little bit time consuming, but considering the fact that we're going the economic route for this project, I really can't complain. After cutting out the bodice, I have to hold the fabric up to my own bodice to make sure that everything looks okay and that I know where I want the channels to be put. Moving on to the second pillowcase. Now, I would love to tell you that I had some precise measuring technique when I was cutting out the strips for the first 2 tiers of the skirt, but that would be a lie. I cut the first tier to be 2 hand lengths wider than the base of the bodice and 1 hand length long. By the way, this is my left hand that I'm using as the basis of measurement, not my right hand. My right hand is smaller because of reasons. For the second tier, I simply turned what was left of that second pillowcase into 1 long strip that was roughly 4 hand lengths in width longer than the first tier. That strip right now is in 2 pieces, but with the magic of sewing, it won't be for long. For the third and final tier, I took the third pillowcase and cut off the cuff and the seam because I honestly did not feel like doing any more seam ripping. Then I folded the pillowcase in half long hamburger style, and cut that now double-folded rectangular piece of fabric to be as long as 1.5 left hand lengths, and cut along the fold so I had 2 equal-sized strips of doubled-up fabric. These strips will also be joined as one in holy matrimony via sewing machine. I ended up chopping the second skirt tier. This made it so that all skirt tier strips were 2 left hand lengths wider than the piece before it. For the sleeves, I took the last pillowcase and folded it in half before cutting off the cuff and the seams because I didn't want to do any more seam ripping. And after all the unwanted fabric was cut away, I was left with 2 large rectangles. So eventually, after some procrastination, I decided that I should actually get to sewing the dress. Then I decided to procrastinate some more by doing some interior decorating and hanging up this old tapestry that I was going to turn into a crop top, but I never really got to that. I also hung up these old lights while I was at it because I thought my crafting space needed a bit more sparkle. I started the actual sewing process by first hemming all of the skirt pieces. Now, there was a lot of fabric to keep track of, so it was very important for me to have a good way to organize everything. So in order for the skirt to be as flouncy and princessy as possible, I needed to gather all of the skirt tiers that I just hemmed. I did just a simple straight stitch across the top of each tier, and then I hand gathered everything until the top of each skirt tier matched the bottom of the layer above it. I highly recommend sewing all of the skirt tiers together at some point because one skirt tier will not be long enough for a dress. And once again, we don't want to get arrested for public indecency. Once I had my skirt to a non-arrestable length, I moved back to the bodice. Because I was too lazy to cut out any other bodice pieces aside from the 2 original rectangles, the best way to get this bodice to fit me will be through my favorite sewing material, elastic. To give the elastic a nice cozy place to rest, I sewed 2 different size channels in my bodice. I sewed a channel at the top of the bodice that was about the width of my finger plus or minus a 1/4 of an inchworm. This was for my thinner elastic that would allow the bodice to fit snugly right below my armpits. Then I folded up the bodice to the point where I had marked earlier with my pin, and I made a channel that was about the width of 2 1/4 of my fingers. This was for the thicker elastic that would allow the bodice to fit snugly against my waist. I recommend sewing the skirt and the bodice together unless you're going for a 2-piece dress, but in this case I was not. I wanted my sleeves to be extra poofy and off the shoulder, so I simply repeated the process of sewing thin channels along the tops and the bottoms of the sleeve pieces. They should look like poorly made flags of surrender once you're done. Alright, if you're still watching this, it's time to put the elastic through the channels. I like to first impale my elastic onto a safety pin before I start feeding it through the channel. Because my right arm has been and likely always will be out of commission, I will be using my feet for this part, but that's okay because through some trial and error growing up, I found out that my dominant foot is in fact my right foot, so that worked out really conveniently. Anyways, after making sure that the elastic on the sleeve fit me properly, I took a little break to paint my nails because self-care is important. And I went back into that same sleeve, put in the rest of the elastic, and repeated the process for the next. Because this is elastic, I wasn't being too much of a perfectionist when it came to tying off the ends. However, I did make sure to tie my right sleeve tighter than my left sleeve. Alright, we've got the two sleeves all elasticed up. Just gonna toss those aside and move on to getting the elastic in the actual dress itself now. I repeated the process with the bodice as I did with the sleeves, and then I gave it a quick try on before heading over to the machine for the last time. The final trip to the sewing machine was actually really easy because I only had one side of the dress that needed to be sewed together. The rest had already been sewed together when I was making the skirt, and or because I had cut pieces from a pillowcase, some sides were already naturally finished. I did have to hand stitch the sleeves onto the bodice, but that was really easy. All I had to do was line up the seams and then stitch about an inch on either side of them. And once everything was put together, it was ready for the final reveal. Has this ever happened to you? You open your closet one day only to find that all of your clothes have been replaced with 4 pillowcases. Introducing Pillowcase Dress. Pillowcase Dress is perfect for reading, baking, and even frolicking in the woods. Unleash your inner spring elf with Pillowcase Dress. Pillowcase Dress is made from 100%, you guessed it, pillowcases. Call now to order yours today.
Disclaimer, this is not an actual promotional sale. Please do not contact me with requests to make you a dress. This voiceover was recorded at 4:30 in the morning and should not be taken seriously.
Okay, this is nice, but where are my clothes?